Hey everyone, today I want to lean into a more grounded way to talk about environment stuff. Not as a pro versus cons climate change debate, but as a practical look at how we use natural resources, what we can do in our homes, on our land, in our routines, so that we leave things in better shape than we found them, ideally. Welcome to the Primal Shift podcast. We need to interrupt this episode for a quick shout out to our sponsor OneSkin, because let's be honest, nobody wants the skin cells checking out early. It's called cell senescence, when your cells basically start acting old and sluggish. And OneSkin's OS1 peptide is clinically proven to help slow that down. Plus, it's free of those nasty chemicals you'd rather not have hanging around. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, head over to oneskin.co, that's oneskin.co, and use code MKUMMER for 15% off. Now back to our regular scheduled program before any more cells decide to retire. So I want to walk you through how we try to live in the Kummer house as relatively or reasonably good stewards of this planet. It's not perfect, it's not extreme, but I think it's consistent with reality. And along the way, I'll touch on why some of those top-down policies like the European Union's plan to ban new fossil fuel cars by 2035 feel misguided when the infrastructure and trade-offs aren't yet solved. So here is a list, not necessarily ordered in any particular order, on some of the things that we've been implementing and that we are constantly working on that have the goal to leave this place behind in a better place than we found it. And number one is growing real food chemical free. We try to raise and grow as much of the food that we consume, that includes vegetables, fruits, animals, without synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, or pesticides. And I know it's more work, it's not for everyone, not everyone can afford to raise animals and plant a garden, etc. But it pays dividends. It's healthier soil, it leads to healthier soil, cleaner food, less runoff, and less dependency on corporate supply chains. Number two, and very closely related to this, is fixing the soil instead of draining it. We lean heavily into regenerative practices, from composting to using cover crops, rotational grazing, minimal or no tillage at all, and over time, the soil gets richer, more aerobic, more life in it. And yes, it sequesters carbon, and that's really a big thing because almost everyone thinks that agriculture causes more and more greenhouse emissions and, it's bad for the climate, bad for the planet, bad for the animal, bad for everybody. But that's not true. That might be true for some cases of conventional or many cases of conventional agriculture. But if you do it right, if you follow regenerative practices, you actually sequester carbon, you improve soil quality, you do the exact opposite of what everyone or most people think agriculture does to this planet, to animals, and to our society. It's one of the best ways, maybe the only way, to get out of this situation that we're in by doing agriculture right. Number three, walking, biking, and living with proximity. In the Kummer house, when destinations are close enough, we walk or we ride. We don't treat the car as a default. It saves fuel, it keeps us healthier, you get a free workout, and it forces us to think about where we place things, shops, gardens, co-ops, etc., relative to our home and where we are, where we locate ourselves, Obviously, that in many cases depends on infrastructure that facilitates, walking, like side paths next to the road, bike lanes, etc. And most communities in this country, as I've seen, at least compared to Europe, don't have that infrastructure. But that's something we need to work on so we can walk and bike and not use the car and not have 3 cars at home, one for every person in the household. From an energy perspective, for us, it's not about choosing either or. It's about using a hybrid approach that makes the most sense. We don't pretend solar or any renewable is a magic wand. It is absolutely not. So we use a mix of solar where it makes sense and fossil fuel where we need reliability. The goal isn't erase all impact, it's to reduce it intelligently and resiliently. So when clouds, storms, or capacity limits happen, fossil helps fill in. But our demand is lower because of insulation, efficiency, and a smaller footprint overall. That's our approach. I love solar, but I'm under no illusion that solar is not the solution for everything. Neither is wind or any other of the alternative energy sources. They all have trade-offs that are very often forgotten in the discussion. From a home perspective, one of the best things you can do is live in a smaller home. Our current home is not very big. The one we are in the process of moving to is even smaller. It's half the size. It's 850 square feet for a family of 4 and a German Shepherd and all of the things that we do here. So it's relatively small. It's not a tiny home, but it's not much bigger either. But what it is going to be well insulated, it's well sealed, and it's smart in design. So we need less energy to heat it. We are forced to spend more time outside. That's also healthier for us. That reduces, again, overall our footprint on energy, etc. And it's also easier to maintain and to repair if something goes wrong. And it also keeps us more intentional about what we bring in, because there's less empty space that we could fill up with crap. You've probably have noticed, there's the bigger your garage, the bigger your shed, the more you fill it with crap. If you're limited, you have to really think about, am I going to bring this home or maybe not? And you'll realize, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, that a lot of the things that you bring home are more wants than needs. From a material perspective, whenever possible, we try to stay away from stuff that requires petrochemicals, so we go for wool, for wood, for natural fibers, for stone, whenever possible. And when we use metal, glass, or, polymers, plastic, we try to make them durable, recyclable, or reusable. But overall, we've been on a quest to reduce our plastic footprint as much as possible. And that's very hard, of course, because everything is made out of plastic. But you can make an impact. You can choose to have fewer of those items, fewer fossil-derived plastics that ultimately impact our energy consumption on a greater scale. And then we try to cooperate with nature instead of working against it. When we plant, in harmony with seasons, we accept weeds in buffer zones. We use biodiversity rather than monocultures, let composting cycles run, etc. All of that really helps to be in line with nature. We don't try to control everything. We work with predation, with microbes, with cycles. And it's less about dominating and more about collaborating. I think that's an important aspect. As humans, we have failed to beat nature into submission. Yes, we might have won some battles, but we are losing the war if we try to do that. We have to work with nature. If you look at our backyard, I think that's a perfect example. It used to be a monoculture, lawn when we purchased the property, and now everything is growing. But the soil is richer. There is more carbon sequestered. It's better food for our animals. That means we have to buy less meat because we produce it on our homestead, etc. It's all combined, and you really have to try and work with the cycles of nature instead of trying to outsmart them. We are not smart enough. Nature has figured it out over billions of years. Humans are not smarter than nature. Never seen it. But perhaps the simplest but most powerful thing that you can do is or that we do as well, to continuously ask ourselves, do we really need this or that? So before buying, building, upgrading, maybe pause for a little bit. And I know it's difficult, and we are not perfect. I happen to be a very impulsive buyer. Kathy is much better with this. So I get it. But if you really think about it, do I need this? Or is it just something that I want right now? And you manage to delay it or omit it. Very often we figure out, well, I actually didn't need it, And so by buying more stuff, filling our home with stuff that we ultimately don't need, those decisions compound, and overall you have a positive impact on our footprint overall, from an energy perspective, from a waste and recycling perspective, etc. And I want to pause here, and it's something that's happening in Europe that very much reflects kind of the overall theme of this episode, and that is, in particular in Europe, that gets often framed as strict climate leadership. But there are a couple of things that just don't happen to make sense. And one particular law that I wanted to discuss is the ban of fossil cars by 2035. So in less than 10 years, if it goes according to the current legislation, you can no longer produce a fossil fuel, meaning a gasoline or diesel car, or sell it in the European Union. And so that basically means you'd have to switch over to electric or some other alternative fuel option that doesn't really exist in a grander scale yet. And on paper, that sounds ambitious and kind of makes sense, but in reality, the charging infrastructure, the grid capacity, manufacturing scale, battery supply chains, and recycling systems aren't there yet to absorb such a sudden, at the end of the day, mass shift. And what's even worse is that this mandate locks in a technological path before the full life cycle trade-offs are worked out. Battery mining, that's not environmentally friendly. Disposal, what happens with all of those Tesla cars, once the battery dies or, doesn't perform anymore as it did when it was new. Rare earth metals, grid stress, equity issues. There are so many things that are often overlooked or ignored or just, kind of factored in and said, oh, that's not that much of a big deal. But I think it is a big deal. I mean, can you just imagine, if something like this over here, we've seen it in California, just to, divert from the European Union for a little bit, where, use electric cars, and then it's, don't charge your electric car because the grid can't handle it. I mean, electric is certainly not the answer. We have a Tesla, so I very much appreciate the technology and all of that, but we have it. One of the reasons is because we produce much of our own energy with solar panels. We don't rely then on the grid to charge the car, where that energy from the grid here in Georgia likely is coming from Plant Bowen, from a coal-fired power plant. Is that any better than you see the problem? It's not really as easy as it sounds. And to make that going back to the European law work, you need an enormous overhaul, grid upgrades, huge storage, battery recycling at scale, localized charging everywhere, and raw material sovereignty, and until those are in place, mandates like the 2035 mandate, tend to push problems around instead of really solving them. And the point here is that, first of all, waiting on policy to come up with those mandates, I don't like, period. But it's also not something that really causes immediate change, in the sense of how much we take care of our planet. Because I'm not going to get into the discussion whether or not climate change is real or if it's predominantly human influenced or not. There are a lot of things that I believe we don't know yet, but one thing is for certain: humans are incredibly wasteful and we tend to waste energy, and a lot of other things that we could potentially avoid. And we also generally speaking, poor stewards of our planet. If you just look at conventional agriculture and how things are done, how wasteful we are, there is a lot of room for improvement. But I think that those improvements have to happen on the individual level, grassroots kind of style. And so that's why I look at my, what do I have under control? I'm not going to wait for some policy owner to tell me what I can and cannot do. I do what I think is best for me, for the planet, for the environment, so I can leave it in a better spot than I found it. And for us, that means, fewer frivolous purchases, making practical incremental changes, to improve soil quality, to improve insulation, energy use, moving into a smaller home, use the energy sources that are available and use them smartly wherever they make the most sense. For us, that's a combination of solar and likely grid energy. In fact, on our new home, we are trying to get as much off-grid as possible, not necessarily because we think the grid is evil, but we want to be more resilient. We don't want to have to rely on it. If it's there, great, we can use it. But if we can produce our own energy, the better it is. Producing less waste, walking and riding the bike instead of using the car to go to a grocery store 5 minutes away, that's just a huge waste of time. And especially then if that means, if I want to go to the grocery store, my wife wants to, she takes the car, but I need to go somewhere else, I'll take another car. And then our daughter, as she gets older, she has her own car because she wants to go then somewhere else. That's just a freaking waste of resources. We got to be able to do more with less. And that starts at home. And so, that's the picture in my mind. And it's not a crusade or a condemnation of fossil fuels, but a realistic stewardship path at the end of the day. The Kummer house is still a work in progress and will likely be forever. There is no perfect, but there is making small improvements over time, and to be conscious. What are we doing and how does it impact the environment we live in? Is it having a positive impact or a negative impact? If we negatively impact it, because we will always impact it. There is no such thing as zero impact. Humans have an impact. We are here, and by building a house, by building a road to see the Grand Canyon, all of that impacts the environment. There is no way around it. And that's okay. We are here because we can't do this because we have been put on this planet for whatever reason you believe, but we are here and we get to use the resources, but we have to use them smartly and certainly not wasteful. And so that's my message to you. Don't wait on policy. Don't get wrapped up into electric cars are the future, or fossil fuel is bad, or fossil fuel is the best thing since sliced bread and we don't need any alternative energies. I think both are BS arguments. We really need to look at what we are doing and what we can do better and do that. Choose natural materials, walk instead of drive, resist a needless purchase. Vote with your habits at the end of the day, because that will then hopefully go from take a bottom-up approach and also influence policy, hopefully in a good way. With that, we're going to wrap it up. Let me know what you think. Is that reasonable? Am I full of shite or anything in between? Let me know. Leave a comment if you're watching or listening to this on a platform that supports comment. Shoot me an email. Like to hear from you. Until next time.